The morning sun peeked over the horizon, its soft golden light shimmering across the river's surface like a sheet of molten glass. The air was still cool, crisp with the scent of dew and soil. Birds chirped their early tunes, frogs croaked lazily near the muddy banks, and the tall reeds swayed gently as the breeze whispered through them. Life stirred slowly in the quiet village beside the river, but one figure had already claimed his place before dawn. There, at the same old dock where the wooden planks creaked under the weight of time, sat a dog. A scruffy, medium-sized mutt, with fur the color of rusted autumn leaves. He wasn't a stray in the usual sense. He was something different, something more. Rooted. His name, as the villagers had come to know, was Maru. Maru sat in the exact same spot every morning without fail. Rain or shine, winter or summer, it didn't matter. He would arrive before the sky turned from indigo to amber, gently trotting through the tall grass, his nose low to the ground and ears twitching with purpose. He always came alone and always settled into his solemn post on the edge of the dock, where he'd lower his body, tuck his paws beneath him, and fix his gaze on the flowing water. Some days he would sit for hours through the morning mist, past the chirps of cicadas at noon and into the soft hush of dusk when lanterns flickered on in the nearby homes. He never barked, never begged for food, and never chased after passing birds or dragonflies. He simply watched the river, waiting. The village folk had grown used to him. Some waved at him in passing. Others, particularly the older ones, left scraps or bones nearby not too close, just enough to let him know they cared. Children tried to play with him, but their parents would gently pull them away, whispering, "That dog is still waiting." Because they all knew what Maru was waiting for. It had been almost a year since the old fisherman had disappeared. Mr. Tomas was his name, a quiet man with a warm smile and calloused hands who spent his days casting lines into the river. He wasn't just a fisherman. He was part of the soul of the village. He told stories to the children while they watched him untangle his nets, shared fresh fish with neighbors, and always whistled old tunes that floated through the morning mist. And every single day, his companion was Maru. Tomas had found the dog when he was still a pup, caught in some discarded netting along the riverbank, whimpering and starving. He had taken him in, fed him, cleaned him, and given him the name Maru after the river's original name in the old tongue, meaning endless path. From that day on, they were inseparable. Together, they fished, sat in silence, shared sandwiches on the dock, and watched the clouds drift above the wide blue sky. Maru had learned to understand Tomas, not in the way people speak, but in a deeper, instinctive rhythm. He knew when his friend was tired, when he was worried, and when he was happiest, which was almost always when he was near the water. But one day, Tomas didn't come home. It was late October. The skies were gray and heavy, the wind howling louder than usual, warning of an early storm. Tomas had told the shopkeeper he would check the traps before the rain hit. He whistled his usual tune and disappeared down the winding path that led to the dock, Maru faithfully trotting behind. That was the last time anyone saw him. Later that day, when the winds grew violent and rain lashed the windows of every home, a few concerned neighbors went searching. They found his boat drifting silently downstream, tangled in reeds, his jacket and tackle box still inside. But there was no sign of Tomas. Only Maru, soaked and trembling, pacing the dock and howling into the storm like his heart was beating. Torn in two. Search parties combed the banks for days. Divers even came from the nearby town. But the river never gave back what it had taken. And from that day forward, Maru began his vigil. He didn't understand the finality of it, not in the way humans did. In his heart, his friend had simply gone somewhere for a while, perhaps, but would come back. He always came back. So Maru waited. Every morning, every evening, watching, Some villagers said it was tragic. Others found it beautiful. A few believed Maru sensed something they couldn't tether of spirit, of love, that hadn't quite broken. That maybe Tomas's soul still brushed against the world, drawn by the faithful dog who refused to forget, Lydia, the baker who lived. Nearest the river, tried once to bring Maru home. She coaxed him with meat pies and soft words, even got him to follow her as far as her gate. But by midnight, he was gone. She found him the next morning, already curled up at the dock like nothing had happened, I think, she whispered to her husband as she watched Maru from their kitchen window. He made his choice. Elias, a 12-year-old boy visiting his grandparents for the summer, became fascinated with Maru. He watched from afar, sketching the dog in his notebook, drawing him with angel wings, with a fishing pole, with a heart so big it wrapped around the river. One day, he tiptoed closer and sat beside Maru with his sketch pad. Maru barely acknowledged him, only shifting slightly to avoid Elias' shadow falling over the water. The boy didn't speak. He just drew. Hours passed. Finally, as the light faded and Maru stood to stretch, Elias gently tore out one page, a drawing of Maru waiting on the dock as ghostly outlines of a boat and a man floated nearby. He placed it at Maru's feet, then stood and walked away without a word. The next morning the paper was gone. No wind had blown it away. No footprints surrounded it. It simply wasn't there, but something had shifted. Maru's ears were less alert. His body slouched just slightly, as if the weight of the waiting had grown heavier, or maybe lighter. Maybe something within him had accepted a truth too deep for even humans to explain. Still, he returned, every day, as if honoring a promise, because that's what love does. It waits, even when the world moves on. Days melted into weeks, and weeks slowly wove into the delicate fabric of passing seasons. Still, Maru kept to his routine steady as the flowing river that had taken the man he loved. By now, the village had embraced his quiet ritual, some drawing strength from it, others sorrow. But none felt it quite the way young Elias did. Elias had arrived in the village only a few weeks before, sent by his parents to spend the summer with his grandparents. At first, he missed the city's noise, the steady beat of traffic and screens always buzzing with movement. Here, in this quiet riverside village, time felt slower. People talked softly. Even the wind whispered rather than roared. But it was Maru who changed everything for him. Every day, Elias wandered down the path that led to the dock. At first, he kept his distance, observing from behind trees or bushes, notebook in hand. He didn't want to disturb the dog's solitude. There was something sacred about the way Maru stared at the water, as if the river might speak. If he was quiet enough. One morning, as the sky turned a soft pink and the air hung thick with the scent of wildflowers, Elias brought with him a thermos of warm broth. It wasn't much, just a mix his grandmother had made with chicken and carrots, but he poured it into a small bowl and placed it a few feet away from Maru. Then, slowly, he sat on a nearby stone and waited. Maru didn't move. For several minutes. He kept his gaze locked on the horizon, unmoving except for the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Eventually, the smell reached him. His nose twitched. Still cautious, he stood, sniffed the bowl, and then, after a long pause, took a few sips. Elias smiled. It felt like winning the trust of a knighted guardian. From that day, a pattern began. Elias would come each morning with a different offering, sometimes warm broth, sometimes bits of sausage or soft bread. He never tried to pet Maru, never called his name aloud. Instead, he spoke in soft murmurs about things that lived in his heart. How lonely it had been at school, how his parents always worked too much, how he wished things were simple like they seemed to be here. Maru listened. There was something soothing about having someone to talk to who didn't interrupt, who didn't judge. The boy talked, the dog listened, and the river flowed. One day, as Elias finished drawing yet another image, this one of Maru as a knight guarding a boat made of stars, his grandfather walked up behind him. The old man said nothing at first, simply looked down at the sketch, then at the dog by the dock. That dog, his grandfather finally said, has more patience and love in his heart than most people I've known. Elias looked up. Do you think he knows the fisherman won't come back? His grandfather hesitated. Maybe not with his mind, but somewhere in his heart. He must feel it. But dogs, good dogs like him, they don't let go until they're ready. Sometimes that takes a lifetime. The words sat heavy in Elias's chest. He watched Maru, who now had his chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed in a peaceful trance. He wondered what the dog dreamed of. The gentle slap of the fisherman's boots on the dock? The feel of his hands scratching behind his ears? The sound of laughter echoing across the water? The next morning, Elias brought a gift, a soft piece of blue fabric stitched into the shape of a small pillow. On it, he'd embroidered a simple fish with red thread. He placed it next to Maru, unsure if the dog would even acknowledge it. But to his surprise, Maru gave it one sniff, then gently laid his head upon it, curling his body around like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. From that moment on, the pillow became part of the scene. As the days passed, the boy and dog formed an unspoken bond. Sometimes Elias would sit and read out loud, his voice trembling but growing stronger as he gained confidence. Sometimes they'd simply sit in silence, side by side, two quiet souls finding comfort in presence alone. But something in Maru began to shift. It wasn't dramatic, not at first, just small things. He began to close his eyes more often. He stretched out his legs a bit farther, relaxed a little deeper. Some days, he arrived later than usual, taking his time down the path, his steps slower, wearier. The river hadn't changed. The dock remained the same. But Maru was beginning to let go. Elias noticed, and it worried him. One afternoon, as heavy clouds rolled over the hills and a soft drizzle began to fall, Elias knelt beside Maru and whispered, "You don't have to wait forever, you know? It's okay. He knows you love him." The dog didn't respond, not in the way people would. But his tail gave the slightest flick, a barely there twitch that felt like acknowledgement. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his grandparents' cottage, listening to the rain tapping against the window. His heart ached in a way he didn't fully understand. How could a dog's love reach this deep? Why did it feel like Maru carried the weight of an entire world on his furry shoulders? In the morning, he rushed down to the river, his boots slipping in the damp mud. The dock was soaked, puddles gathering in every crevice. Maru wasn't there. Panic flared in Elias's chest. He called softly, "Maru?" Nothing. He checked the path, ran through the bush, looked behind the trees, but the dog was nowhere to be seen. Just when his breath began to catch and his eyes burned with fear, he heard it, a soft whine, barely audible. He followed the sound to a thick patch of reeds near the river's edge. There, hidden beneath an old overhang, lay Maru, curled up tight, his head on the blue pillow, eyes blinking slowly. Relief flooded Elias's chest. He sat beside him, pulled his knees to his chest and whispered, "It's okay. I'm here." Maru didn't move much. He simply sighed, a deep exhale that seemed to carry more than air. It carried memory, pain, love, and maybe ... release. The river kept flowing. Always onward, always forward. The days grew warmer. Summer ripened the fields. The river sparkled brighter under the afternoon sun, and butterflies danced lazily through the tall reeds. But while the world bloomed around them, A quiet stillness had begun to nest within Maru. Elias noticed it like one notices a favorite song slowing ever so slightly. Maru no longer rushed to the dock at first light. His legs, once swift and sure, now moved with the aching hesitation of memory too heavy to carry. He didn't bark, didn't whine, he was still dignified and calm, but even his breathing sounded deeper, wearier, the kind of tired that no nap could fix. Elias continued to visit every day. He started bringing not just food or small gifts, but words, letters, really folded pieces of notebook paper filled with thoughts and dreams and questions he could never voice to anyone else. Sometimes he read them aloud. Other times, he folded them into tiny boats and set them afloat on the river, watching them bob and drift until the current swallowed them whole. One letter read, "Dear Maru, I don't know if you understand every word I say, but I think you feel things. You feel them deeply, like I do. I wonder if the fisherman was the only one who truly understood you the way you understand him. You don't need to keep waiting, you know? You've already proved your love. And maybe, just maybe, he's waiting for you now." Maru never looked at the letters, but Elias had a feeling the dog heard every syllable as if the boy's heart had spoken directly to his. One evening, as the sky bruised purple and gold and the fatine cicadas began their nightly song, Elias sat cross-legged near the edge of the dock, watching Maru sleep. His body was curled tighter than usual, his breathing shallow but peaceful. Elias reached out a trembling hand, letting it hover near Maru's back before gently placing it on the coarse fur. For the first time, Maru didn't flinch. That tiny moment, the soft weight of Elias's hand resting on Maru's back felt like an eternity suspended in stillness. It was the dog's way of saying, "You've become part of my story now." Later that night, Elias told his grandmother, "Maru let me touch him today." She smiled, though her eyes betrayed a sadness. "That means he trusts you with his pain." Elias nodded. "He's letting go. I can feel it. I just don't know if I'm ready for that." His grandmother placed a hand on his shoulder. "None of us are ever ready for goodbye, but sometimes love means letting someone know it's okay to go." The next morning, Elias returned to the river with a plan. He had spent the night creating something he hoped would speak louder than words. He'd painted a small wooden sign no bigger than a school book, and on it he wrote, "He waits because he loves. But now he has loved enough to move on." Then, beneath it, in memory of Thomas, the fisherman, and Maru, his faithful friend, he planted the sign near the base of the dock, beneath the tree where Thomas used to hang his fishing hat. It was simple, hand-painted with shaky lines and a heart at the bottom. But it felt right, like a final offering. A farewell maybe. When Maru arrived that morning slower than ever, his legs wobbling slightly with each step, he paused at the sight of the sign. He sniffed it, sat beside it. Then, as if understanding its purpose, he turned to the river and lay down. He didn't face the current like before. This time, he turned sideways, eyes half-lidded, as if looking for something not in the water. But beyond it, Elias sat beside him in silence. The wind picked up, rustling the trees above. Leaves fell like tiny whispers around them. For the first time in many mornings, Elias didn't speak, didn't sketch, didn't feed. He just sat, two souls keeping watch, not for the return of someone lost, but for the peace that comes when waiting is no longer necessary. That afternoon, the village held a small gathering. It wasn't planned, but word had spread about the key sign, about the boy, about the dog. People came with flowers and candles. Some brought food to leave near the tree. Others simply stood in quiet reverence. No one disturbed Maru. Even Lydia, the baker, knelt beside Elias and said gently, "He's not just waiting for the fisherman anymore, is he?" Elias shook his head. He's teaching us how to wait and how to let go. Maru slept through most of the gathering. His breathing was steady calm. People came and went. A few patted Elias on the shoulder. Some left in tears. As dusk arrived and the crowd thinned, Elias noticed Maru lift his head and look toward the horizon. His ears twitched. His nose lifted into the breeze. It was then Elias saw it too. A small boat drifting along the river, completely empty, bobbing gently with the current. It was old and worn, and no one knew where it had come from. But it passed right by the dock, silent and unburdened, and disappeared downstream. Maru stood slowly, his body trembling but determined. Elias watched, frozen, as the dog took one step toward the edge of the dock, then another, and simply sat, as if saluting the boat on its journey. A single tear slid down Elias's cheek. He didn't know why, but in that moment he felt something change. Not in the wind, not in the water, but in the air around them. As if Tomas had finally come to guide his friend home. As darkness crept across the sky and the stars began to blink into view, Maru lay down again, head resting on his blue pillow. He didn't close his eyes fully, but he no longer stared at the river. Instead, he turned his gaze toward Elias. And in that gaze, there was no more searching, no more waiting. Just peace. The river was quiet the next morning. Too quiet. No birds chirped in the reeds. No insects buzzed at the water's edge, and the wind itself seemed to hold its breath. The sun had just begun to rise, casting golden streaks over the still current, when Elias walked slowly down the path, a woven basket in hand. Inside were small things: a knitted blanket his grandmother had made, a piece of bread with honey, and a new letter, folded with care and sealed with a tiny leaf. He didn't know why, but something felt different. The air didn't move the same. The trees stood a little straighter. The dock looked too empty, as if it were waiting for someone who wouldn't come. Elias spotted Maru even before he reached the end of the path. The old dog was there, as he always was, lying curled beside the post where Tomas used to tie his boat. His body looked peaceful, almost asleep. His nose pointed toward the river, pillow beneath his head, paws stretched slightly forward. The only thing missing was the rise and fall of his chest. Elias stopped. The basket slipped from his fingers and landed softly on the earth. He didn't cry at first. He didn't even move. He just stared at Maru, his companion, his listener, his teacher in grief and loyalty, and tried to understand what his stillness meant. There was no pain in the dog's posture, no fear, no tension. It was as if Maru had chosen this spot for his final breath, chosen to stay until he knew Elias was strong enough to carry on, and now he was gone. The silence broke. Slowly, Elias approached and knelt beside Maru, reaching out to touch the dog's fur one last time. It was still warm from the sun. His ears were soft, his eyes gently closed as if in mid-dream. But there was no doubt. Maru had kept his final vigil. "I knew," Elias whispered, brushing a trembling hand down Maru's back. "I knew yesterday when you looked at me. You were saying goodbye." The tears came then, slow and quiet, carving down his cheeks like streams feeding into the river. He wasn't sobbing, he didn't have to. It was a sorrow so full it had become stillness. He lay beside Maru, curling himself beside the dog's frame like they were two puzzle pieces, briefly touching one final time. He stayed like that for hours. The villagers didn't disturb him. They watched from a respectful distance, many with tears in their eyes. Lydia came with a plate of pastries but didn't say a word. The old fisherman who'd once shared tailies with Tomas simply tipped his hat and stood silently under the willow. Even the mayor, who rarely visited that side of the village, walked the trail and stood by the carved sign Elias had planted. His hand over his heart. By late afternoon, Elias stood up, wiping his eyes. His grandmother appeared, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll bury him by the river if that's what you want." Elias nodded. The spot was chosen just beneath the willow tree, where the sunlight filtered through like blessings. The townspeople brought shovels, blankets, and flowers. It was quiet, reverent. Elias carried Maru himself, wrapped in the blanket, the blue pillow tucked under his head. He placed him gently into the earth, kneeling one last time to rest his forehead on Maru's. "Thank you for waiting," he whispered. "And thank you for showing me how to love without needing anything back." As the grave was filled, Elias stepped back and watched the earth rise gently over the body that had waited for so long. Then, with the same brush he had used to paint the sign, he added one last line beneath it: "Now he rests." Because love doesn't vanish, it transforms. Over the next few days, the river seemed to change. It no longer felt like a place of loss. Instead, it became sacred ground. Children played quietly on its banks, speaking in whispers when near the dock. The sign Elias painted became a local landmark, and every few days, someone new left a token: shells, drawings, even little paper. Boats like the ones Elias used to send downstream. But for Elias, the loss felt sharper at home. He missed the walks, the silent presence, the feeling of being seen without needing to explain anything. One morning, as he sat alone by the willow tree, flipping through the pages of his sketchbook, his grandfather sat beside him. "You gave him a gift most don't receive," the old man said gently. "A peaceful ending, in a place he loved, with someone who loved him back." "I just wish he didn't have to go," Elias said. "We all go eventually, but it's what we leave behind that matters." Maru didn't just wait for Tomas. He waited for the right time to leave, and for the right soul to carry the story forward. Elias looked down at his sketchbook. His last drawing was unfinished. It showed Maru not by the river, but crossing a bridge of stars, his tail up, his eyes bright, with Tomas waiting on the other side, holding a fishing rod and a smile. He added the final lines in silence, then closed the book. That evening, Elias made one last paper boat. But this one wasn't for the river. It was placed beside Maru's grave, anchored with a smooth stone and a note inside. "To the dog who waited, now rest. Your watch has ended. Love, Elias." The moon rose. The wind stirred the reeds. Somewhere, in the darkness, a heron cried out and flapped its wings across the river. Elias stood, shoulders tall now, gaze steady. He knew the pain wouldn't vanish, but it would change. It would soften, just like Maru had in his final days, and tomorrow, he would walk down the same trail, not to wait, but to remember. The first autumn without Maru arrived with a silence Elias hadn't expected. The leaves had begun their slow transformation, turning burnt orange, soft gold, and deep crimson. The air carried the scent of wet earth and distant fires, and the river moved a little slower, like it too was mourning the dog that had become its most loyal companion. Elias walked the familiar path every morning, still with the woven basket, still with letters folded neatly, even though there was no longer anyone to read them to. Or maybe there was, because even though Maru was no longer at the dock, Elias could still feel him in the rustle of the willow leaves, in the ripple of the water, in the warmth that still lingered on the sun-worn wood. He visited the grave daily, placing a new leaf or flower beside the smooth stone someone from the village had carved with the words, "Here lies Maru, the dog who waited." Children still played nearby, always pausing for a respectful moment when they passed the grave. Some even spoke to it, telling Maru about their days the way one might tell an old friend. A few village elders claimed they sometimes saw a dog-shaped shadow by the river during twilight, standing tall and still, facing the current. No one questioned it. They didn't need to. In a way, Maru had become the soul of the river. Elias was different now. 2. He had grown not just taller, but deeper. His drawings had matured, no longer just of dogs or boats, but of emotions, of memories. One sketch showed Maru standing beside a young boy, both of them watching the stars. Another showed Tomas in the distance, waving from the other side of the river, his face peaceful, his arms open. He submitted one of his drawings to a national children's art contest titled Unseen Heroes. It was a watercolor of Maru sitting under the tree by the dock, looking out at the water with a look of love that needed no explanation. At 1. A small ceremony was held in the village to honor Elias and, more importantly, Maru. News crews came. Articles were written with titles like "The Dog Who Waited Taught Us How to Love" and "One Boy, One Dog and a River of Memories." People from nearby towns began to visit. Some cried. Some brought their dogs. Others simply stood in silence. During the award ceremony, Elias was asked to give a short speech. He stood in front of the gathered crowd, the same basket in his hand, and said, "Maru waited every day for someone who never came back. At first, I thought that was sad, but now I understand. It wasn't about sadness. It was about love that never ends. He taught me that loyalty is not weakness, and that grief doesn't mean the end of a story, it's just another chapter. And if he could hear me now, I'd say this: you were never alone. Not really. You brought us all here, and we'll keep remembering." The applause was soft, respectful. After the speech, a few people came to speak with Elias' parents, teachers, even an older man who had once served with Tomas during his youth. But Elias excused himself and walked quietly back to the willow tree. He sat beside Maru's grave and laid down the newest letter. This one was different. It was sealed in a small jar, weighted with a smooth river stone, and inside was a drawing, a picture of Maru, running with his ears flapping in the wind, his eyes full of joy, and Tomas beside him, their shadows stretching into the distance. He buried the jar gently beside the grave. "For the future," he whispered, "so no one forgets." Years passed. The riverbank changed subtly with time. Trees grew thicker. The dock was repaired and repainted, and a new bench was placed beside the grave. The village eventually built a small plaque near the path that read, "To Maru and Tomas, for showing us that love waits and never truly leaves." Elias grew too. He became an artist, a real one. His work was shown in galleries, many inspired by dogs, rivers, and silent stories that spoke volumes. Every new piece carried a trace of Maru in it, whether in a tail curled just so, or a sky that looked exactly like the one from the day of the final vigil. He would return home often, always walking the trail to the river. The basket, now worn and faded, still came with him. He still brought letters, even when he was much older, even when the gray had touched his hair. One day, many years later, Elias returned not as a boy, but as a man with a gentle limp and a dog of his own. A golden retriever named Sol. Sol was different from Maru, playful, eager, young, but he too paused respectfully near the willow, tilting his head as if hearing something only dogs could understand. Elias smiled and sat beside the grave, resting his hand on the stone. Still. "Here," he said, and still remembering. He pulled out a notebook and began to draw. Sol curled at his feet, the river in the background, and the ghost of a dog sitting proudly beneath the tree. And that evening, as the sun dipped low and the river shimmered with gold, something beautiful happened. Sol lifted his head and barked softly, not at anything visible, but toward the dock. Elias turned. There, just for a moment, he saw it. The silhouette of a dog, still, proud, facing the current. Not a ghost, not a trick of light, but something deeper. May are you. Watching, waiting, but this time, not for someone to return. This time he was watching over them. Elias smiled, tears sliding down his cheeks. Not from sorrow, but from love. I see you, he whispered. The river didn't. Reply. It didn't have to. It remembered. And now, so would the world. Forever.